For your salts.
We can share it.
It being 6 o'clock, we'll call the meeting to order. Kathy, will you do roll call, please?
Marty Silverstein, Dan Richardson,
Here.
Heather Henry, Ben Baumfock,
Here.
Lonnie Kitching,
Here.
Luis Llanes,
Here.
Erica Sparhawk.
Here.
Thank you. Marty said he's going to be a little late because of work. Not sure about Heather. All right. Item number 2 is consent agenda. We have item A, accounts payable. Item B, trustee minutes from November 13th. Item C, liquor license renewal for the Cowan Center. Item D, the Nettle Creek Control Panel funding. Item E, ordinance number 17, series of 2018 deed restriction agreement and rezoning at 689 Main Street. Somebody have any questions or want anything pulled?
No.
Anybody want to make a motion?
Would move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by Erica, seconded by Lonnie. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. All right, motion passes. Item number 3, persons present not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to address the board on an item that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to trustee comments. Welcome, Heather. Any comments?
I haven't had any council meeting.
Either.
I don't think so. I didn't come prepared with any.
Okay. Lonnie? Luis?
Just one. Since we don't have a meeting next Tuesday, just to remind everyone here and our board and public to donate to one of their local nonprofits on Colorado Gives Day, which is next Tuesday. So several nonprofits in town the funds will be matched to what you donate. So I encourage you to go online and donate to them. So coloradogives.org.
Thanks, Luis. Heather, I know you're getting settled, but any comments from you?
Good e-board meeting last night. A couple of things came up around maybe the confusion around some budget between last year and this year. So probably not at this meeting, but our next one, it'd be great. I'll kind of circulate the email.
Okay.
And just see. Otherwise, some really good stuff. We're looking at participating in a program, plastic, and I'm spacing it because I'm not settled. Plastic something coalition.
Plastic free or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of a grassroots resource site, an organization around trying to eliminate plastic from your life, from the environment, etc. So it starts with individuals, it works through restaurants, kind of different sectors, it works through what towns can do. So we've obviously taken some of those initial steps in Carbondale, and it'll be really interesting to use this kind of an effort to build even more education around just plastics in general, not even just single-use plastics. So I was really encouraged by kind of where they're headed with this very educational, knowledge-based effort first, before we even start looking to expand the bag ban or beyond. And so you should see some information in the chamber newsletter, as well as hopefully a editorial to the paper, things like that. So that was great. There were some other good highlights, but that was the main kind of one of note.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Erica?
This relates to CC4CA, which is the Colorado Communities for Climate Action. And on, I think it was on December 16th, the Air Quality Council approved LEV standards, which is something that we had all agreed to as part of our CC4CA policy agenda. And then specifically on that topic, agreed to kind of endorse and back up. And that's low emission vehicle standards. There used to be federal standards for vehicles, and those were done away with, and so now a lot of states are adopting these statewide standards. So those were adopted, and then the next step that the coalition is working on is called ZEV, which is the zero emission vehicle standards for the state. So that will start the next process with the AQCC and with a decision most likely in March or something. So, but I'll keep the board, and I think I forwarded it around the notice on that, but I can't remember.
You did.
I went out of town on Thanksgiving, and
You did.
now it's all a blur what I did before that.
Hey, Lonnie.
Just a quick update that Root Eye Reservoir is going to start spilling some water to primarily help Aspen, the power plant, stay operational. So we might get an ask, Jay and Kevin, for some of our acre feet. We're going to be meeting again, Rawapa, on Thursday, and I'll have more detail then. But that's going to be a part of the discussion.
All right. Just a couple reminders. We need to schedule the second meeting or the third meeting in December, so we'll do that after the meeting tonight, but think about that. And then just a reminder that Angie is asking for comments on the VCAPS report by, I think, Thursday. So just a reminder.
Angie's asking for comments on what?
VCAPS,
Oh,
help me with
right.
the acronym.
Yeah, it was only the ones in attendance or who were on the initial invite list
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that she
you wouldn't-
circulated the draft to.
Never mind then. I thought it was still the whole board.
I was going to say, I don't know if I've seen that. What is VCAPS?
Yep. So that's due by the end of this week, our comments, and then they should be turning that around pretty quickly.
Okay.
So we should have that for sure by the end of the year, probably by the middle of the month.
Are you going to be submitting comments?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Last comments? Mark, anything from you?
Nope.
No?
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to item number 6, special event liquor license for the Carbondale Clay Center. Anybody here from the Clay Center? No. Okay. Kathy, anything in particular about this one?
They're holding it at 201 Main Street, and I believe they had it there last year as well. So there's really nothing different. It's kind of like their cup auction, big event fundraiser.
Yep. They certainly know the drill.
Yep.
Staff is recommending approval. Any?
I would
Anybody?
move to approve the liquor license for the Carbondale Clay Center on December 7th at 201 Main Street.
Second.
Motion by Erica, seconded by Luis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. All right. Now for the main event. Item number 7, public hearing of Main Street Marketplace, major site plan review, variance, conditional use permit, and alternative compliance. The applicant is Crystal River Marketplace LLC. The location is Lot 1, Carbondale Marketplace subdivision, which is the northwest corner of Main Street and Highway 133. I think to kick things off, I'll just disclose that I work for Sendigo. We also use Bob Schultz for some things, but there's no financial conflict, but I just wanted to disclose that. Also, just to kind of set the stage, thank you. You guys put together quite a complete packet. I think it's fair to assume that we've all read it. We've allowed an hour and a half, but that may include some public comment. Love to have enough time for this board to really weigh in. So, like I said, just assume we've read the packet. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Janet to introduce it.
Great. Thank you. This is application for major site plan review, conditional use permit, alternative compliance, and a front yard setback variance. And the board's required to hold a public hearing and approve the application, deny it, or you can continue the public hearing. And just a little bit of background, because I'm not sure what members were on the board when Carbondale Marketplace was approved. But Lot 1 is a 5.37 acre parcel, and it's Lot 1 of the Carbondale Marketplace subdivision. And that subdivision was approved in 2016. And the subdivision plat divided the 23 acre parcel into 5 lots, 1 through 5. And the one we're talking about is Lot 1. The subdivision plat also dedicated the streets, Hendrick, Shorty Pabst, and Nislanik. City Market, the 10,000 square foot retail building, and the fueling station will be located on lots 2, 3, and 4. And then First Bank is approved for Lot 5B, and that's in for building permit now. The majority of the public improvements that were required for Lot 1 were determined during the review of the Carbondale Marketplace subdivision. That includes the relocation of the Rockford ditch. So the street improvements on Shorty Paps, Hendrick, all of those were done and are already secured as part of the Carbondale Marketplace SIA. And so, what we're talking about tonight is simply Lot 1. And so tonight what you have is a mixed-use development. This property was zoned mixed-use, I think, last year sometime. And it has 115 multifamily residential units and about 10,000 square feet of commercial. All of the units would be rentals, and 23 of them would be deed restricted to AMI. And overall, I went into a lot of detail in the staff report, just kind of trotted through the UDC. Overall, the application is in compliance with the UDC with one variance, and that's from the front yard maximum setback. And that's a new setback that was created with the mixed-use zone district. And that means that you can build no farther than 10 feet from the property line. And that was part of our new urban efforts with the comp plan to keep the buildings in the MU zone district closer to the property line. But they're asking for a variance from that maximum front yard setback because of the fact that there's a 20-foot easement for the Rockford ditch along the south part of that lot. And so they can't build a building on the ditch. So they're putting the building back about 18 to 20 feet, so they're as close as they can get to Main Street. But in order to grant a variance, the board has to make a finding that there's an exceptional site condition that creates a hardship to the applicant. And staff and P&Z recommend approval of the variance because the easement is a pre-existing condition that creates a hardship. And I want to note that the easement predates the UDC because Carbondale Marketplace was submitted, reviewed prior to UDC. And the UDC is what created the new mixed-use zone district. So it came before the UDC. The other fairly new things, I'm not sure how much we've worked with it, is alternative compliance. And alternative compliance is a new section in the code. And this section requires or encourages a unique design and provides flexibility to the development standards. And it's not a variance, it's just an alternative compliance to meet the intent of the code. And they're asking for alternative compliance for the street trees and private outdoor space. And what we've been doing with the street trees is that we've been following the tree board's preference that the trees be planted based on the size of the tree. The tree board already has a species selected, small, medium, and large. And then the spacing is dependent on the size of the tree that they're proposing. So it gives their landscape architect a lot of flexibility, but also makes sure that the canopies don't overlap when they reach maturity. And we are doing the amendment, putting that in the UDC, and you'll see that in the next few months. The second is for the private outdoor space for Building E. And Building E is on the corner of Hendrick and Main Street. And initially, the balconies were proposed for that building facade. And then as it was going through P&Z, the applicant said that they would prefer to provide the private outdoor space on the building to the west. And they did some creative design. They'll show it to you with a barbecue and a shelter and some chairs and I think a picnic table. And that would be private for the 6 residents that live in that building. And the idea behind that is to provide a more iconic facade on Building E because it's located on the corner right at the entryway to this development. And P&Z recommended approval of that. As far as the engineering, Public Works, which includes utilities, of course, found that the proposed development is consistent with the plans that were approved with the Carbondale Marketplace and reviewed the traffic report and found that the overall numbers were correct. And Kevin is here, Public Works, if you have any questions on any of those. And Yancey, of course, on the development teams here. Fire District reviewed the plans and they're fine with it overall. And so the way the process would work is if the board's inclined to approve the application, then we would go back and develop a development improvement agreement, which is like a subdivision improvement agreement. It kind of lays out the phasing of development and secures the public improvements. And that would come back before the board in January. And so overall, as far as the application, I'm supportive of it. I think there's a need for rental housing in the town, and this provides a good mix of housing and commercial near the shopping areas along Highway 133 near the downtown as well. And it does provide some commercial square footage and hopefully some creative flex space where it can go back and forth. And in addition, the residential development along Main Street provides a buffer to the residential units to the south of Main Street. And so I recommend approval of the application, and I included conditions and findings in the staff report. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Does the board have any questions specifically of Janet? Job well done, Janet.
It's a good code. Makes it easy.
All right, we'll turn it over to the applicants, and if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm Bob Schultz, Robert Schultz Consulting, and this is Briston Peterson, who is the managing partner of the development. Andy Wisnowski from POS Architecture. We also have other POS team members, Drew, his son, who is our modeling guru, and Dave Ritchie. And from Sopris Engineering, we have Yancey and Kyle. And Rich Camp is the landscape architect on the team and who was really instrumental in the original site planning and just a huge resource for the whole project. So we kind of brought everybody here in the hopes that whatever question comes up, we'll be able to answer it at least to the best of our ability. The last time we saw you was just almost exactly a year ago, and it was rezoning the property to mixed use instead of the old planned community commercial zone district that was going away and wanted to be replaced by what the comp plan wanted to see here for mixed use. After that, we started the architecture and final planning. Displayed that in September at an open house at POS's office on Main Street. Had a great turnout. I know a couple of you came by. And then last month, the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval. So, as Janet noted for tonight, the kind of the big ticket items are the variance along Main Street, the two alternative compliance options, and then your perspective on the overall site plan. We spoke about the Rockford ditch for those of you who were here when we did the rezoning because we knew there was no way we could meet the 10-foot maximum setback. So we disclosed that issue at the time because we didn't want to rezone the property to have that requirement if that was a deal killer. And at that time, it seemed like it was worth moving forward with mixed use. We're proposing some ground floor residential where it makes sense, and that's a conditional use in this zone district. And then we've got the street trees and a different approach to a portion of the building at the corner of Hendrick and Main. Okay. So this is the site plan that you saw a year ago, or at least that some of you saw a year ago. And the things that people liked about it, we did an open house before that one as well, and things that are basically right out of the UDC is using buildings to frame the site, keeping parking internal. The connector for pedestrians and bicyclists through the center of the site to the front door of City Market was something that a lot of people liked, and then really thinking through how people who aren't in cars can get around the site and through whatever happens in the northern portion of this property in the future. The current site plan will look familiar. It's more detailed, but it's basically the same layout. There have been a few good ideas, or at least things that we think are good ideas, that have happened since a year ago. the POS team came up for some ideas for, we had some studios above garages in our plan last year, and they had something that we thought was a lot funner. So you'll see some studios that are up on stilts in the air instead, and some studios framing the park on the west side of the futsal court. The bottom of this picture is Main Street, and on the right-hand side you have the new extension of Hendrick that's out there underway, and on the left-hand side Shorty Pap's Way. So City Market would be just above this to the north of the apartment buildings. The key components of the project stayed the same, but we were able to put a little bit finer pencil to them. So the park along Main Street got a little more refined. You'll see a model of that in a moment. And then the Tot Park up towards City Market got a little bit better definition as well. The landscape plan went through a pretty good revision. As all of us know, it was a very dry year. So about 80% of the landscaping is now native grasses, and that was a change from our thinking. The futsal court is going to be an artificial surface, so the amount of sod on the property has been dramatically reduced down to pretty much the minimum. In terms of looking at the specifics of the project, there are 3 buildings that front Hendrick Drive, the new extension, and all of those will have some ground floor commercial. And then the studio mix is I think, relevant to what the community needs at this time. 97 of the 115 units are less than 800 square feet. So we're trying to get a product that is something that the community seems to need. There are studios down as small as 390 square feet, and so hopefully we'll be able to build those at a rate that allows them to work for people. There are also variety. There's flats, there's townhomes, studios on stilts, and units above commercial. So one of the things that both the comp plan and the UDC talk about is variety. And there's certainly variety in the mix as well as the unit type. We hope that that means that there will be something for anybody who's looking for a rental. The comp plan sets the big picture, and so for this property, this area, you have the city market, and that's under at least the infrastructure part of it under construction. There's an additional 9,000 square feet of commercial that goes with that city market, and there's a little over 10,000 square feet in this proposal. So we think there's a good mix of commercial in addition to the residential units, and that's what the comp plan was looking for. It talks a lot about bike and pedestrian access, so Rich spent quite a bit of time thinking through how that would work on the property. And it's convenient to both work as well as RAFTA for people who work outside of the community. The kind of one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to clients about is let's just design what the UDC tells us, and it's pretty prescriptive. And so that's what we started with was, okay, what would the UDC tell us for laying out the buildings on this site? And so we've got the form that's given to us, the variety in the massing and scale. You'll see that when we look through the model, the variety in the architectural style, and then also the variety in the unit type. And so we've got a range from studio to 3-bedroom, flats, studios, stuff above commercial, studios on stilts. So we'll talk a little bit more about architectural prominence, which is one of the things that's specific to this zone district that the code talks about.
I'll talk a little bit about materials and that you'll begin to see in the modeling and some of the elevations, but within the package. But as Bob's already indicated, we spend a significant amount of time developing a pretty broad range of material palettes to really differentiate the architecture in unique ways, so that we did create a broad variety through the entirety of the development proposal. So we've got anything from wood timbers to sidings that range in vertical orientations, horizontal orientations, wood materials, metal accent materials, and most significantly, this project is proposing brick in several key locations to specific, really important corners in the project that you'll begin to see, and the brick even has variety in color. So it's not just one palette that we looked at throughout the development. So it should really, hopefully, present itself in a very organic fashion, that it looked like it developed over time and wasn't just a single notion throughout the entirety of the design.
So our wizard, Drew, has created the opportunity for us to climb on a drone and tour the site, and we think this will give you a pretty good sense of it. The landscape design is reflected in this, so when you think through the landscape issues, those are accurate per the plan, the intention that we have, and the architecture that you see on the buildings is representative of what's in the detailed drawings that were in your packet.
So what I'm going to do is walk over to the site plan, and before we start the tour, I'm going to give you a little sense of, because you may not get a sense when you're moving around this where you are. So I'm going to kind of give you the brief synopsis of what the tour is going to look like once we start it. So just to orient you here on the map, Main Street being down here on the bottom, Hendricks Drive here, the edges of the parking area, you're just beginning to see the city market and Shorty Paps along the western edge of the property. So this drone tour that you're going to take starts you out lifting off in the center of the project, kind of heading out toward the northwest, and then circling back around the project just over the edge of City Market building, and then back around toward the eastern edge. We will come around the corner here, and at that point we're viewing it at this point way up in the air, and we'll start to drop down to a more pedestrian view. And what we'll do is walk you through the most prominent pedestrian and biking path through the project that takes you over to City Market. So it'll walk you through that till we get to a point here, and then we're going to get on a bicycle and we're going to start traveling along this northerly edge around the outside edges, so you can really see all the buildings from the primary front facing elevations. We'll stop right here for a short moment just to kind of talk a little bit about this corner, because that was one of the things that we'll be talking a little more about in terms of that particular building. And then we'll move along this edge along Main Street. We'll stop right here just to talk a little bit about this edge and along this street pedestrianscape, and then continue along Shorty Paps, and then we'll take you along a tour so that we can talk a little bit about how the buildings are four-sided in the architecture and how they feel from both sides. And so as we move around the internal sides of the building, we'll take you along the back sides of that. And then final, we'll kind of move our way up in here and then kind of finish, just so you can kind of get a sense of what the interior open space feels like. So that's kind of what the tour is going to look like.
All right.
Exciting.
Okay.
So as you're looking up over the site, this is the first chance to start looking at some of the differentiations in massing and the architectural styles. The center of the site has a futsal field. For those of you unfamiliar with it, it's pretty much a 5-on-5 soccer that's pretty popular here in the community. We are now heading towards Hendrick, and we're going to go down Hendrick towards Main. These buildings received a lot of attention because this is what a lot of people are going to see when they're coming and going through the site, and that's all mixed-use buildings along that portion of the site. And then we come down to Main Street. There are townhome buildings on the left and then mixed use on the right. We're going to drop down, and this little park at the entrance spent a fair amount of time thinking about after our first round of reviews, and looked like some opportunities for public art in here and some little dwell opportunities. Creates a nice entry for pedestrians and bicyclists either coming to their home or passing through to go to City Market. The sidewalk through here is 8 feet wide, so it gives us enough space to put bicycles and people on the same space. You see the native grasses, native plants along the way, once again trying to get the water load down. On the left there was the first peek at the Stilt Studios, and then we get into the common area with some sod for the kind of passive recreation area there. So that would be more of a passive park site. On the right, you'll see the Tot Park, and the code requires about 400 square feet. We're at more like 3,000 square feet, and that's over on the edge, the northern edge of the site. There's City Market in the background. We're now at that corner that Andy showed you in the back side of the property. These first 2 apartment buildings are probably the first things that would go up. It would make sense from a construction standpoint to try and get those going while City Market's going. Then we transition into mixed use, so ground floor commercial along here with 2 stories of residential above. When you get to the corner, the code likes to see these cutouts at the corners, and brick gives that sense of prominence to signify that you're anchoring a corner, and then the materials change as you move around. This is the access to the parking area from Hendrick into the site, and then once again some brick at the corner and a cutout. We've got some of the units along here have small studios on the ground floor. Those could be flex spaces. They're envisioned as residential in the immediate term, but they could also be live work. They could be small commercial spaces. This building has really been something that the team has thought about a lot. You see the balconies that are on this building. This was what was in our submission. There are 6 units on the upper floor of this portion of this building, just where the brick is. And we'll show you in a few moments what we think would happen if we could take those balconies off and make that building stand out a little bit more from all of the other buildings at the site, and also do some things that we think make it attractive to a cafe, restaurant kind of use. So we're now on Main Street, and we're going to head west on Main Street. We're going to see the end of that portion. So there's 4 balconies there. You see the space there where it's only 2 stories. That's where we would relocate the outdoor open space for those 6 units. These are townhome products. It's the type of unit that Bristol grew up in. They're about between 13 and 14 feet wide. These are very small townhomes. If you grew up in a big city, you may be familiar with this type of product. The 2-story ones are 2 bedrooms, and the 3-story units are 3-bedroom. The place where this person is walking is pretty much on top of the Rockford Ditch, so that gives you a sense of the issue that we face with the buildings. There's even a little bit of a step back in this unit closest to us. That's because the ditch is turning towards CRMS there, so we had to push the building back a little bit to allow it. That can give you a sense of that. But in terms of the intention of the UDC, I believe it wants to create this streetscape. It wants this kind of an appearance for the community. So we're heading down Shorty Paps now, and you get another peek at the Stilt Studios. And these are some additional, there are 2 buildings with 4 studios each. and they have lovely views out onto the common open space, and there's some public parking right along Shorty Paps there for friends who come to play futsal. The backside of the buildings have received attention too. It's not just a blank stucco back to the buildings. There's architecture that's going on, as Andy said, all four sides. The parking area has public access, but it's really not intended to be a street and going across that parking lot. And then we see the backside of the buildings along Hendrick, and now we're at the corner, the backside of the building at the corner there, another little pocket park. So we're at Hendrick and Main. Then we get a little bit better view of the Stilt Studios here. They should have a lovely view of Sopris out the front and Red Hill out the back. And then we go into the central common area. And you see the kind of passive area, and there's a little gazebo type building for family gatherings and those kind of social and cultural opportunities, and onward through that into the futsal field. You see once again the nice views from those studio buildings that we came up with in the revised plan. In general, the site takes advantage of the southern access, and it's got some nice views of Sopris and Red Hill from most of the units. So that gives you some sense of the what we think it'll look like without having to rely on flat screen two-dimensional images. So going back to the all right.
We're good again.
Go. The sort of the actions that are required. The Rockford ditch is something that we can't do anything about, and we think it meets the criteria for a variance. We don't have any legal right to build in it, and the condition was created before the setback was in the code, the maximum setback. And to my knowledge, there's only 2 times this has been applied. And one was Dr. Stein's, and this property, and it didn't work for either property, the maximum setback, for different reasons. This is more like what the setbacks would actually be. The specifics of it are in your packet, but the gist of it was we put it as close as we could while allowing room for a foundation system. So one of the criteria for the variance is that you've minimized your request, and that's the document that we believe we've done that. We talked a little bit about this building. So these are the 4 balconies, and there are 2 that are on the Hendrick side of this. So this is the building as was in our original proposal when Andy and Briston were really focusing on this building. They started thinking it should stand out. It should create a sense of entry. It should look a little bit different. So this is an alternative. You see the smaller 2-story green building to the left. That's the roof where those individuals in those 6 units would enjoy their private outdoor space. The balconies would come off, an awning would come at the first floor level, try and create that ambiance that might attract somebody for a restaurant, cafe, and make that building stand out a little bit more, make it more iconic.
We just kind of felt the building needed to be a little simpler. The balconies do 2 things. In our opinion, if they're on the building, they become intrusive to the potential for outdoor public spaces that could surround the lower level because they'd be hanging out over the top of them. The second thing is because it's a very prominent corner, the balconies not only create more of a distracting element to the exterior facades, but to add another layer to that is people will begin to populate those decks with things that may be on that particular corner aren't always the best things that we'd want to see. And having that unique opportunity next door to have a really great kind of a public outdoor space that takes advantage of great views in both directions just seemed like a much better and simpler solution that we thought was a win-win. And after some discussion with the P&Z, they really felt like that was the better solution as well, and agreed with our general proposal for a change.
Thanks. Will you go back to the old version just so we get a
Sure,
picture of
sure.
it one more time? Okay, so it is just that building. Okay. Thank you.
Next. So the replacement space, the drawing on the right gives you some sense of there would be some sort of a key entry or a lock entry so that those 6 units would have access to it. And it's about twice the amount of space they would have with individual balconies, but it's shared rather than being carved up into 60-foot spaces. But they would be the only ones with access to it. The views from the south would be towards Sopris, and the 3-story building on the west should provide some nice shade in the setting sun. So we think it would be a popular spot for people. And it's only in 6 of the 115 balconies. Good. Another one of the items is a conditional use for ground floor housing. The bar is pretty low in the UDC for achieving that. We just basically have to show that we'll not have a significant adverse impact on surrounding uses or the town. We don't believe that's the case, and in fact we think that there's some benefit to offering this, particularly the spaces that are flex spaces. That is something that can respond to what's happening in the community over time. And so we think that the need for rental housing makes sense, and putting a lot more commercial at this site might in fact be a deterrent to future development around this building that I think a lot of us hope will happen. On the community housing front, as Janet mentioned, there are 23 units. We have more bedrooms than the code requires. As you're probably aware, there's a 20% requirement, but there's also a requirement that 15% of the bedrooms. We're over that 15%, and they're integrated into the site so that they'll be coming online as the rest of the rental houses come online. They aren't segregated into one particular area. I won't go through this chart, but the point of it is that the column on the right is where the community housing units are, and it just displays that they're integrated throughout the site. So no matter what, or however the rest of the project develops, there will be community housing that comes online as that portion of the project comes online. I'm going to ask Yancy to help us with the next couple of slides. As Janet noted, there's some overlap in terms of things that are going on out there between the City Market development and Lot 1, that they work together, even though they're 2 different projects, that he can explain some of those items.
So this drawing I'm just going to point to is the same thing as on the screen. But with the City Market approval, there was a lot of off-site and on-site infrastructure that had to be built. And so I'm going to give an overview of what's already approved and what's under construction out there, that some of it will actually serve most of Lot 1 with very little more public improvements. So here's Main Street, 133, East Atlantic. So Lot 2 here's where the City Market is. Lot 4 is a 10,000 square foot commercial building just to the north of it. And then here's the gas canopy. Here's where First Bank was approved and is under construction up here. And so Lot 1 is this southern lot that we're talking about tonight. And to serve the City Market in Lot 1, sewer was extended from over here in the county road across the CRMS property into this project, which that's actually been built earlier this summer. And there's a water main that came out of the Crystal Road across Main Street and along that's actually built. And of course, just about 6 weeks ago, City Market went ahead and funded their SIA commitment for infrastructure, so we're out there building the water line loops throughout the project that will serve this whole project at build out. The Rockford Ditch kind of runs across the site. and went through the city market, and so that's being under construction now. So this green is where the new Rockford ditch piping project will do to get it out of the city market in Lot 1, which was described by Bob by our setback. Shorty Paps is all along the west side, all the way up into the East Atlantic. And then Hendricks comes up and turns to 133. And then, of course, Parker Drive is just a short piece. It serves First Bank. The Holy Cross overhead power line that runs all the way along here, if you've noticed, that's been taken down, majority of it. It'll be underground in phases, which this actually is a match line that goes up to the north. We actually have brought sewer across 133 to serve First Bank from the north, and a water line that will actually loop into the project. It's off-site infrastructure. And these are all red water and sewer that will be built with the city market. So really what you're seeing is Lot 1 here. Really, we'll have no new public roads. We will have water and sewer, of course, and some electric, and the other public improvement will be the overhead power lines along Main Street that will be underground with Lot 1. So that's kind of an overview of all the infrastructure that's been going on, and it's been approved and it's secured. There is some public improvements for Lot 1, but it's pretty minor for the number of units and what we've got going on here. So that's just kind of an overview for some of you that may not have been part of the city market infrastructure.
Yancy, real quick, does that include the undergrounding behind Ace, that last section of Holy Cross, which
Yes.
wasn't done?
Yeah, that's what this red
Yeah.
is representing. That we'll get all the way over, what is this, Village Loop, I think it is?
Village
Yep.
Lane.
Village Lane, yep.
Yancy?
Yes. So the next slide Bob has up there is the Hendricks Main Street intersection, and we just want to kind of point out that, you know, Main Street's 2 lanes with parking on both sides. And so what we're going to propose is a left turn lane into the project, north on Hendricks, a left turn lane in Hendricks Drive to the south, and then the improvements on Hendricks, so we end up with a much better intersection to kind of handle what we think is the focal intersection to Lot 1. I think what else? It's pretty much just a blow up of that, just to kind of define that. It will be a 2-way stop here and here. The traffic study indicates like 2040, if this becomes congested or level service, that you can go to a 4-way stop and really increase the level of service. Really similar to what Carbondale did on Main Street here. We had 2-way stops up and down Main Street for years, and it became a problem, and then we implemented the 4-way stop, and I think it's really made a difference.
Easements?
So this graphic kind of shows the easements that would be granted to the utilities, egress and ingress emergency vehicles in the town for water and sewer. So let me get this right. The ingress, the access is the red hatch that's underneath. It shows where the emergency vehicles would come and access the project. So there's no more additional public right-of-ways or streets being dedicated to the town to maintain. The hatch here is for public utility easements, or no, this is the pedestrian easement. So we're proposing these connections here to be publicly dedicated in an easement, where everything else will be internally. Of course, you already have public trails along Hendricks and Shorty Paps and Hendricks. The other blue color is all the easements required for water, sewer, electric, telephone, and cable that's throughout. It kind of lines up over the top of the access easements. So that kind of gives an overview of what you'll kind of expect in the DIA with public improvements.
Thanks, Yancy.
Okay.
I'll do the connectivity.
That's
one.
it.
So in terms of connectivity, which is another one of the principles of the comp plan and the UDC, there are a lot of pedestrian and bike connections through the site. For us, the most significant contribution of this one is that one right through the center of the site because it leads to the front door of City Market. Previously, we had people out on Hendrick on bicycles trying to get into the site and then through the parking lot. We think this is something that'll make it more convenient for people trying to get there on their extra cycle to go shopping. And there's connections that go to the trail along Highway 133, which takes you over to the Rafta Park and Ride, and then the existing infrastructure for navigating the roundabout to get downtown. The town hired a consultant to review the traffic report and went back and forth until everybody felt really good about where we were at with the numbers. The approach that they took was they looked at two scenarios. One was, let's pretend like the only thing that happened was Lot 1, and in 2019 it's completely built out, and that everybody is accessing onto Main Street. So that gives you kind of a worst case scenario for impacts of just this project on Main Street. The second one was, let's look at 2040, and City Market is built out, the bank is built out, the normal background traffic growth that CDOT projects has occurred, and Lot 1 has been built out. And what would be the situation then? And the assumption was that whatever goes into the existing City Market site would generate about the same amount of traffic as today. So there was no attempt to try and just move those trips around and somehow not make it look like any additional trips were occurring. The key to traffic world is peak hours. In this case, it's afternoon peak hour for this site. And so about 100 trips in the afternoon peak hour, about 1,100 throughout the day. Denise Barkhurst isn't here, but she asked at one of our early meetings, actually it wasn't even a meeting, she just came to something and grabbed me and said, how many people do you think are going to drive up Hendrick and cut through there? So we asked that question, and their estimate was about 5% of the traffic, or about 55 vehicles per day. As Yancey hinted, one of the questions was what happens at that intersection of Hendrick and Main over time? Will it flow? And the traffic model suggests that yes, it will. If for some reason it's wrong, you could do a four-way stop and be in level of service C at 2040. One of the other questions was, could you put a little traffic circle in there? And the finding was that it isn't needed, but if we wanted to do it, physically there's nothing in the plan that would prevent that from happening, so that option is still on the table. On the parking front, which we've saved it to the end, but I always like to tell people parking is what planning's really about when you get down to it. The code would require 183 spaces. We're proposing 196. There are some on-street spaces that aren't a part of that count. Particularly along Hendrick. We think that'll make those commercial spaces a little more attractive to tenants if there's a potential space out front of it. And there's also some spaces on Shorty Paps that you see an easement on to make, even though it's on our land, to make it clear that the public has the right to use those spaces. The code requires 10 commercial parking spaces, and those are located in our site plan. There will be some additional bike parking for the residents, but those are not related to the code. On the landscape front, the alternative compliance, until we get the code changed to reflect what appropriate spacing for trees, you'll probably continue to see, we use the same exact language that you approved for Thompson Park. It's what the tree board is proposing, and it'll probably ultimately end up in the UDC. So we think that that's appropriate, and Rich has developed his plan in accord with that. So short version is we think that we have met the comp plan and the UDC guidance, and the request is that we get the project going and have some flexibility as we move forward, so that the project can respond to the market. I don't think there's anybody that intends to see 115 units built out there tomorrow, but to get started and then see what happens over time and what makes the most sense. Maybe. So Janet outlined the 4 actions that you're being asked to do. Approve the site plan, the variance for the Rockford ditch, the conditional use for ground floor residential. We've got the 2 alternative compliance pieces, one related to those balconies at that portion of the building at the corner of Hendrick and Main, and the street tree issue. Our request, we have worked closely with staff throughout this. There's one condition that I probably should have paid more attention to sooner. Condition number 5 puts an 18-month timeline on the public improvements. We'd like to remove that condition and address that in the development improvement agreement. We need to meet with Mark and we need Yancey to finish his work and then come up with a schedule of those improvements. We'd like to bring that back to you January 8th as a development improvement agreement. So rather than prescribing a certain number, it's 18 months in condition 5, that we don't know whether that's going to make sense after we go through that work. We'd like to wait on that and have it be a part of the development improvement agreement that you look at in January. With that, we've got anybody here that we hope can answer your questions.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I didn't mention this before, but it is a public hearing, so I thought we'd ask questions of the applicant and then open it up to public comments, and then we'll bring it back to the board for deliberation. So with that, any questions of the applicant? Erica?
Can you clarify the flex spaces, like these ground floor studios, and if they weren't going to be residential, I guess how big are they? Like what kind of commercial would that be?
Mm-hmm. So we don't know, but we know they have to have 14-foot ceilings, so they could be a studio, a small studio. Mm-hmm. We talked about the idea of micro live work units, mm-hmm. where maybe there's a little loft in there, and if you're a one-person shop and that maybe a live work scenario could work, or somebody doing small scale retail that just needs, can't afford a big space. But so by having the 14-foot ceiling that's required by code, it gives us all of those options as possibilities. Mm-hmm. And so what they would be day one, the most restrictive thing from a design perspective is residential, because we have to have the outdoor open space and we have to have the bathrooms figured out. Mm-hmm. So if we start with those and kitchens, then it creates the most flexibility for the use of that.
Okay. And I think that was, identified as a need, at least in the art space study, was that mixed use for artists. So, or a live workspace is a better word for it. But, okay.
And I'd ask the board to chime in if you have questions like related to that. Chime in and let's talk about topics all at once, rather than have you ask all your questions. Mm-hmm. or so. Yep. So just along those lines, so 14-foot, anything else, Janet, that like parking, would parking be significantly different if it was commercial versus ground floor, or anything else that would be, okay.
No, because the parking's, the number of parking spaces is dependent on the size of the dwelling unit. And with these really small dwelling units, it's fairly minimal. So it's probably pretty equivalent to commercial. So they're probably pretty interchangeable.
We also have a few extra to play with by having a little bit more parking than is required by code. Mm-hmm. If we do have some of these things shift around, we can accommodate it without trying to build a new parking somewhere.
Okay. Eric, could you have another? Who else has questions? Lonnie?
On your utility bundle, do you intend to put in any ghost conduit for broadband along with the other ones that you mentioned? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Should I continue or
Go
wait?
for it.
Oh, okay. And then, do you anticipate any consumer shift from the Elgibel City Market to the Carbondale location because it's going to be newer, just thinking ahead in terms of parking and access?
City Market does.
Okay. And have you calculated that into?
But for us, we need to be clear that the City Market subdivision has occurred and that our project is the housing
Separate
project.
from that? Okay, got it. One more?
Sure.
Okay, and is it understood that the LLC is responsible for the maintenance of the adjusted easements? Yes, okay. Thank you.
So, yeah, that was one of my questions too. So, Briston, describe how the maintenance will occur. It's not going to be an HOA, or will it be an HOA, or what does that look like?
We'd probably have a management company that effectively does everything from snow plowing to, landscaping to cutting grass to maintaining the futsal court, maintaining all the common area.
Okay. Is there anything that would require that or memorialize that, or if you wanted to create an HOA and then turn maintenance over to the homeowners, is there anything in these documents that would require that one way or the other?
If we could, right now the project is contemplated as rental. If that's critical to the board, we could contemplate if the portion of the project gets converted to fee simple units and there's an HOA that's established, it could clearly an HOA could be set up. And
okay. I don't want that. You have some beautiful landscaping, and I'm just thinking of ways to make sure it remains that way.
Yeah. Well, it's the success of any project. We feel that by us sort of owning the responsibility of the upkeep, that it would be in our best interest to make sure that the standards were kept fairly high.
Yeah, I like that. And I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, is I think that's a better model to maintain that. So is there a way to memorialize that so that happens? That might be an unfair burden, so that's why I just throw it out there. But I like the idea.
Yeah, I think we're going to have an economic incentive to make sure that our investment, which is fairly substantial, is kept at a high level.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Ben?
Thanks for a really nice, clear presentation, first of all. Before we jump into all the details. What about, so this is all designated as rental, but so you'd have to come back if you wanted to sell some of these at some point and subdivide, okay. And then what about short-term rentals? Would those be allowed under this? You mentioned somewhere in the packet that there's a loss of rental housing in town partly due to short-term rentals, and this is partly a remedy to that, to add to the stock. But, Janet, would they be allowed to rent these short-term? Could one of these buildings essentially become a, de facto hotel or something like that? Is there anything to prohibit that?
I assume the management company could probably, they're the ones that have the leases and define whether a short-term lease
Yeah, I don't think there's any prohibition in the code from them doing
No.
that, if that's the question.
Yeah, that's the question. And I don't know that I'm inclined to prohibit that, but I think it's something for us to consider that that has happened to buildings in some communities, right, where a building that was thought of as long-term rentals gets sort of gradually converted. But here it could be even under central management, like we're going to do short-term rentals in one. Even if that's not your intention now, it could be somebody in the future's intention.
Sure.
So.
And Ben, I could share with you that we've been approached by City Market, for example. They're having a tough time housing some of their employees, and we're in preliminary conversations about potentially having a portion of a master lease with City Market where they could have the ability to, if you say, control 5 or 10 units where they could house their employees, that ultimately could be a short-term situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I guess I'm thinking more of, the Airbnb type thing where it's 1 and 2 nights in a week and stuff like that. It just
really haven't explored that as really a market that we're trying to satisfy.
But it's allowed.
Yeah.
It's allowed. In fact, the hotel is one of the permitted uses in the mixed-use zone district.
Okay. All right. I just think we should just be aware of that, and I'm not saying that we should prohibit it.
Well, and it's worth noting, we have consciously decided to kind of take a hands-off approach to VRBOs at this point, but who knows? We may become more restrictive in the future, and that could have implications, so it sounds like.
There could be a market where maybe a portion of the still housing or the units to the west side of the futsal court, where maybe those are more geared towards that, but
Okay.
we haven't really focused on it.
I think the good thing is that because it's not a PUD, it's using underlying zoning, that if we make any future changes town-wide to affect this zone district, they would affect this property. So I'm comfortable with that, but I just want it to be on the table. I have a couple others, but it looks like Marty might have some related to that.
Yeah, just along the same lines. I mean, what type of, you're renting these out, your management company is, correct? So, I mean, you're going to be going for what, 1-year leases, basically?
Yeah, typically, if not longer, Marty.
Not longer.
Yeah.
You know, so it's in your economic interest with the 1-year lease that you don't want to.
Yeah, you don't
You're
want to.
probably going to have provisions that they can't sublet for
Correct.
less than a certain period of time.
Correct.
Okay.
Ben, you want to keep going?
Sure. With the balcony issue, it sounds like that's one of the key issues we need to make a decision on. Just to clarify, so the private outdoor space for that iconic building, if it doesn't have balconies, is actually the roof, not of their own building, but of the building next door.
It's really a building.
Okay.
The building is broken up into segments
Okay.
to try and reduce the massing. And so there's actually, you'd be on a stairway. If you were on the second floor, there would just be a stair that took you there. If you're on the third floor, you would just walk over to there and either swipe or punch in a code to have access to
My
it.
question was just whether the people living directly under this really cool rooftop space are like banned from using it. It seems like it's just setting up awkward neighbor interaction.
And a beer, maybe.
No, but is it not for them though?
It's not for them.
It's not for them.
So the party's going on upstairs, but you can't.
They have their own balconies.
Yeah.
They have their own balconies.
They'll need to get to know each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they really, really wanted in, I bet they could bribe their way in.
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't, regulate that, but I think that's a little awkward. Otherwise, I think okay with the balconies. Do we want to talk balconies for a minute?
Yeah, I had some. Was that idea talked about with the public open house? Did anybody weigh in? So that was a new idea. So okay, so we don't know whether the public thinks that's a good idea.
It was the 2 public hearings with the P&Z, but no one attended, so
Okay.
nobody weighed in.
Okay.
The P&Z did, but yeah.
Okay.
They attended.
Anybody else on balconies? No. And then my last question is just, my questions last time you were all here centered primarily around the kind of the mass of just the block itself, that it's kind of a double block size. I'm comfortable with that now. I think you've done a really nice job with that pathway through the middle. But my other question was really about the buildings on the north side, the bigger apartment buildings. And I still have a question. What's the front of that building?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from a practical perspective, the front of it is towards the parking lot. I mean, if you're somebody that lives there, from an aesthetic perspective, the other side, the north side, also looks like the front. We ran into a similar thing, if you remember the school district buildings. So there's a front door that goes out onto a walkway, but there's really nothing there, and people come in and go out of the back of it. But someday, there might be more stuff there, and it'll be more busy, and so you've anticipated that. And it's a similar thing with these buildings, is that on a daily basis, people are probably going to be coming in and out of the back, and the front is towards City Market.
But there's not a access along City Market for them, right? It's just the parking lot of City Market, right?
There's a sidewalk and walks into the units that front that
Okay,
side.
so their front door is actually facing north, facing the City
Yes.
Market parking lot. Because in your flyover, you referred to the south-facing side of those buildings as the back, and said, it's
Right.
got this architectural
Right.
style
Right.
in the back.
Right.
Okay, I still find that area a little bit challenging. I think it's gone through enough public process and gotten to this point. We're not going to redesign it, but okay, thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
So I just wanted to say thank you as well. It's incredibly complete and well done application, tons of information. So kudos to the entire team. A couple of really great things, honestly, that jump out at me that are really fantastic and frankly unusual for this kind of product, honestly, is the decks and the generous size of those decks. Like, they are legitimately party decks, which I hope they become, and people are hanging out and watching street life. Size of the sidewalks, so I think that at least the two main sidewalks along Main Street and Hendricks are 10 feet. Is that right? 10 feet? At least 8. They look like 10. And really generous planting areas for some good-sized trees that are along there. So you guys aren't trying to, like, eke anything, into these tiny spaces, which I really appreciate. So I had some questions on, I guess, both the private improvements and then the public improvements and that timing, and maybe it goes along with condition 5. So you reference like the flexibility of the private improvements, right? So like when to build the little pocket areas or the toddler, or how are you thinking that it really is associated to each building, or like what are some ways that I guess we could be comfortable, because I love the shared space, but how do we make sure that like there is enough if just 2 buildings go up and a few years go by because of the market? So that's like on the private side. And then the public side, I understand and I think I support not having this very constrained 18 months. But I'm just curious if you're talking about like infrastructure, meaning services and utilities, or infrastructure meaning, say, the path, from Hendricks and through. And could we make sure maybe we separate those and talk about them differently when you come back with the team?
So as Yancy mentioned, the public utilities are pretty modest, the list on this property. There's water, sewer, there's some electrical infrastructure, and not a whole lot else, fire hydrants, things like that. And so that's what the DIA would focus on,
right.
The security and the timing of those. The wastewater, our initial thought is that probably all goes in at once. And Yancey's got some more work to do on the water as to whether to do it 1 or 2 phases. It's a relatively simple plan, but there are some technical things that have to get ironed out that we just aren't going to do until you tell us whether you want to see it move forward or not. But that can all be done and brought back to you by January 8th. The private improvements, as the development around that improvement occurs, then those would get constructed and dedicated. So, for instance, if the buildings A and B near City Market go in first, you would do the sidewalks and the street trees in front of those and dedicate those. And then building by building, in the interim, you could do some pressure fine trails so that there's still access. But you don't want to build it, tear it up when you go to build the building and then build it again. So those would be tied to when those buildings come in. The DIA, Janet has a condition in here about keeping the property presentable when it's not fully built out. And the DIA can put a little bit more meat on the bones of that. But just to give you kind of the 30,000-foot view, that's the current thinking around those issues.
So then the last one would be, say, something like especially that cut-through trail. So in the DIA, maybe pulling that out specifically, separate from, like you were saying, you'd have water, sewer. I like that, to come back and basically break that apart as much as you can.
Yeah,
to be comfortable, because the condition right now is this big lump sum of all infrastructure in 18 months, and that's not feasible.
And this gives us a month to do that in a thoughtful way
Exactly.
and bring it back to you.
Yeah.
We just haven't really done a deep dive on that, and we'll start tomorrow if this is approved.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, I support that. It's a better place for it. Like I said, I think just the more you can break that down into like some of the other elements, say the trails and things like that, I think would be great. That's all I have.
Okay. Go ahead, Luis.
I also want to echo the thanks for this presentation, which is very complete and detailed, and very excited about all the open space and the green and landscaping that's been put into this. And I'm excited about the potential transit stop, so I love that aspect of that. One of the things that I am a little bit concerned about, I guess I'm maybe getting too hung up on it, is the traffic study and what seems like the potential to have, seems easy enough for residents and visitors to get into Lot 1 off of Main Street or future Highway 133 access, but it just seems like getting out, even with a two-way stop, making that left out of Shorty Paps Way or Hendrick Drive, and it seems like that may potentially either clog up people trying to exit. And I don't know how that maybe in the future also impacts 133 or the roundabout or any adjoining streets or neighborhoods. And if there's any other plan besides the four-way stop or potential roundabout that's been discussed.
No, it was examined in the report from the traffic engineer says that it's not required. So and there's an increment of a four-way stop that if the traffic is wrong, then there's still something that you could do to address that. So for somebody coming out of Hendrick and turning left on Main towards the roundabout, that's the concern. Yeah, and so the if that became if we're out 2030 and that became a problem, the solution at that point would be to put in a four-way stop, and that gets you back down at level C or better, according to the traffic engineer.
And Luis, just to clarify, when we went through the approval process for the 5-lot subdivision, the reason that's a potential transit stop is that the bus stop was removed. We're still building or having built the infrastructure for a bus stop to be there, but it's not included because RAFTA asked for it to be removed when we processed the 5 lots. So there's a potential for that down the line. That'll be an operational issue for us to work out with RAFTA long term.
It's some parking spaces in the interim, and those parking spaces go away if we can get RAFTA to serve the site. Yeah. So it's the same design that was previously discussed. It's all there. Yeah, but it would require RAFTA saying, yeah, we think it makes sense to stop there.
Cool.
And if I could add, Bob, clear back as we started planning this, is town and city market development was all that gridding and the connectivity. So I think as it actually develops out, it's going to give the drivers more opportunities on 133, even industrial place, because of the way you can go through city market too. So I think it's only going to get better access over time.
Right. Yeah, it seemed to be that way in the future. Just looking at it just from Lot 1, it seemed like that was the potential for a lot of congestion.
Yancy, Bob mentioned a level of C, a level of service C. Can you give us an example of where in town we have a level of service C at a stop sign?
Is there anything that isn't level of service C or better, Kevin?
I would guess most of the intersections on Main Street function that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to put that in perspective.
Thanks. That does put it in perspective.
Yeah, and that's 2040 with background growth too.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Luis, any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
I'll jump in within. Again, thank you. That was a pretty, Drew, nice job. That was a pretty cool model.
That was fun.
First, just kind of a big picture. Is there anything that you would do differently outside of the UDC? Meaning, does the UDC restrict you in any significant way that you'd change the project?
I'll try the first answer at that. what I love about it was this property has been, as we all know, a war zone. And so one of the things that people said for a long time is Carbondale doesn't know what it wants. And so the town spent a bunch of money and a bunch of time and a bunch of people to create a comp plan and a UDC that's very prescriptive. It's very prescriptive. And once you embrace that, there's a certain beauty to it. And clients don't always embrace that, but we got lucky. Bristol came on board with that. And so I'm a little bit blinder to that right now because when we started off with Andy, he's a free thinker and started, the PUD thinking, which is really where that would take us. And so we went a little bit down that way and then said, yeah, but that's not what we're doing. We're just going to design what the code says. Okay. And town spent all this time and money figuring out what they wanted. Why don't we just design that? Yeah. And so I don't know that I've put much headspace into some radically different thing. And most of the things in the UDC, I think, are pretty commonsensical.
Okay. And I don't want to put a bunch of time into it, but Andy, we're constantly making tweaks and we're open to ideas. So I really appreciate that you followed the UDC, but if there's anything that, you think was significantly restrictive, maybe let Janet know offline and just so we know.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the housing mix. I assume you guys have done your homework. We're about to receive some needs assessments. Do you feel like obviously the mix is pretty representative of what those reports will say we need? I mean, can you look in your crystal ball and say what those reports say?
Well, there's a little bit of everything, so I'm not sure what the report would have that we don't have some of in there.
Okay. Just wanted to ask that because we are about to receive that, and we'd hate to approve a project that was grossly different.
The missing piece when we went through in the zoning that we heard from council as well as members of the public was some 3 bedrooms. So a few of those got integrated into the mix.
The play area, on one of the documents in here, I was a little concerned that it was going to be a little far north and just constantly be shaded, but then it looked like in the model that it kind of encompassed that whole area and would get more sunlight. Is that the way it would be, that to take up essentially that whole green space area, get plenty of exposure? Okay, good. Jay answered that question. Bike parking sounds like, or it looked like there was plenty of places around the site, but you've seen raft to park and ride parking lots. What's the plan if bike parking is wildly successful? Is there a plan to cover those bikes? I mean, I just want to know, is the bike parking going to be successful there?
Well, that's an unanswerable question because we'd have to know the future, but the code requires bulk storage, which is one location for bikes, and the code requires a certain amount of spaces for commercial. And whether those are the right number of spaces, it's what the code requires, and it's 1 for every 3 parking spaces that are required for commercial. And so we've provided those. The ones that are on the drawing for residential, we haven't detailed out. I can't tell you how many spaces are in, how many bikes fit in the racks in those spaces. It's just been, here's a site where we can do it, and we'll figure it out later. If you go to like Villas de Santa Lucia, those bike racks are pretty full, and so there's certainly reason to embrace bike parking. Otherwise, it becomes a management headache. Bristol and a partner used to own Garfield Apartments, and so they're pretty familiar with this market and how that's going to work.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, our code is our code, but just something to be aware of. I'd hate for it to be an afterthought and kill all the design that went into this project. Already asked that one. Okay. What about solar? You guys have an intent to put solar on the buildings?
The commercial portions have the requirements that are in the green code. There's no proposal at this point for roof solar for the rentals. As you know, probably better than anybody up here, there's a little bit of a puzzle about rental properties and solar. The good news is that, you know, our utility mix is changing rapidly, and so if Holy Cross and Excel are able to achieve their goals, then
you won't have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Having a tight envelope seems like a good thing for us.
We kind of require that now, so I wasn't too worried about that. Okay.
I have one kind of along those lines.
That's it. Okay, go for it, Erica.
Kind of along with solar, but thinking of future, you may, I don't think it's a requirement, but in the future, your tenants might need to charge electric vehicles. Mm-hmm. And so at least planning conduit in parking spots so that that could be done easily, or maybe near your commercial spaces. Just as a kind of, that would be a smart thing to do. Mm-hmm. Then you're not tearing up concrete later to put in any charging infrastructure. That's all on that one.
Is that something that you would consider? Have you looked into that? It's too costly, or?
That's a very good point. I think it's an amenity that we'd want to offer.
Yeah. Great. If you want Bob visiting there, you got to do that.
Yeah, mine's out there right now getting some free government juice.
Remembered one more, Dan.
Okay, go ahead.
I guess the playground made me think of it, but you know, we have this sort of ad hoc daycare coalition. Been looking for space, and so I don't know if you've talked to any of the existing.
We met with the Blue Lake folks, and we had a different configuration along Hendrick, and when we looked at this at the rezoning, that we hoped would work out for them, and there was just, we couldn't get there.
Okay. Anything you can share in terms of barriers that, I mean, is it just space needs, or?
Space, price, they wanted to own rather than rent. The specific requirements that come with a daycare in terms of outdoor play areas, the amount of it, the surface, made it not very flexible space, and their budget was really restricted in what they could do, and it really didn't lend itself to new construction.
Thanks. I'm glad you kind of
Angela was one of the first people that we met with the director, the president of the board, and Angela, and I talked to Angela, and we got a program, and we laid out something to try and see if it would be great for the project to have it there. Yeah, it would be.
I mean, in reciprocal ways, clearly. So, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing the kind of feedback on that too. It's helpful.
Any other questions before we open it up to the public?
I think that's your
okay. It being a public hearing, I will open the meeting up to the public for any comments on this item. Okay, seeing none, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Barney.
I'd really just like to make a comment. Thank you, not only for the presentation, but more importantly for the size of the units, and hopefully that's going to impact the affordability of the free market as well. And I think the demographics show that as populations are aging, or as younger people are starting out, they can get by with small units, but the key thing is the price point, and hopefully by using these small units, we'll be able to keep the price point where it's affordable for more people, and we can keep more people in Carbondale. And unfortunately, we see so many young people leaving. And also, not only young people, we see seniors who don't need that 2,500 square foot house anymore, who want to downsize. So I think done a really good job of reading the market, and hopefully the price point will be such that it's successful for you and for the town.
Thanks, Marty. Okay, so as Janet alluded to, as did Bob, we have a handful of things to consider. I'm scrolling back to that. So we have the major site plan review, the conditional use permit, the setback, the alternative compliance for the trees and the balconies. And then we have a request to remove condition 5. So I guess what I would do first is ask the board, are there any concerns that you want to dig into first about any of those items? No. Not even condition 5, which is the 18-month. So correct me if I'm wrong here. The 18-month says thou shalt have all public improvements, including, say, the playground, the trail, or the sidewalks, everything completed within 18 months. Is that correct?
Right. And, I'll say that's something, I'm fine with, because that's something we'll have to hash out with the development improvement agreement, especially going along with what Heather says, like figuring out how the sequencing is going to go, the phasing, and get a better understanding. I think that'll help us understand the time frame for public improvements. So I don't have any heartburn for taking 5 out.
Okay. I don't necessarily have heartburn about taking it out. I think it would behoove us to provide guidance if we have particular thoughts. And I think maybe along the lines you were thinking, Heather, that I'm not wed to 18 months, but if we grant more time, then I would want more specificity to make sure that, like, the playground goes in when it should. I understand putting a sidewalk through a construction site might be a little difficult, but the way I phrased it was I would like more specificity if we give you more flexibility in the overall timing, so we know. But I'm fine, hashing that out at the DIA phase.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm fine with that as well.
Heather.
Janet, what's vesting for this process? What's the overall vesting?
3 years.
So no matter what, we're going to see a DIA that would align with that somehow.
That building permits have to be pulled within 3 years for everything?
No.
It's important to distinguish between vesting and this development deadline. Development deadline is going to be a year, 18 months, whatever, to build improvements typically. The vesting is a period in which the project is entitled to proceed under the current code. And the board could make changes to the code after the 36-month vesting period that would apply to the project. So it's really two different things. They're both important, and the development agreement would probably reflect both those things, but they're different dates.
And we can change the vesting in the development agreement.
Under state law,
whatever.
if you determine this to be a site-specific development plan, which I think it is, that you'd have to grant a minimum vesting of 3 years. Upon request, you could voluntarily agree to, in your discretion, to grant a longer vesting period. I don't know if that's been requested, and that would bring on a development agreement for that purpose.
Any other thoughts on that? Pulling condition 5, and my thoughts, can we disagree with more specificity if we give them more time? Or
I think that makes sense. So what you're saying is the development improvement agreement would say something like, when this portion is developed, then this portion of the public improvements shall be developed.
Yeah.
Phasing like that. Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. Because I think we all know that the market is unpredictable, and we don't expect this to all go up quickly, and the town doesn't want things to go up all at once. So phasing and staging is good. Yeah.
Okay. About anything having residential on the ground floor as opposed to commercial?
I think they did it in the right place. I think if it was all the way up to Hendrick Drive on Main Street, I probably wouldn't support it in that first few buildings where we're talking about getting rid of the balconies, that building. But as you go further west on Main Street, we know that the properties to the south have not developed commercially for all these years, and we've rezoned some of them as residential. So I think it's just acceptance of reality of West Main Street. And we always talk about not wanting to compete too much with the core of 4th and Main, you know, historically that's been what this has been a battleground about, as Bob referred to, is how do we have a vibrant space out here and maintain vitality downtown. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having residential on Main as you move further west, and we've got it along East Main, closer to 133 also.
Yeah.
And they're also small. It's not
Yeah.
like it's a 3-bedroom on a ground floor or something.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the flexibility of the design, that I think a lot could happen in those spaces as they exist now, and that they can also evolve. So I don't have an issue with it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Front yard setback. Anybody have an issue with that?
No. Makes sense.
The variance, you mean?
Yes.
It's kind of a no-brainer.
Alternative street trees. It's not really an alternative. We're just, okay?
Yep.
No issues
Fine.
with that?
Yep.
How about the roof deck in place of the 6 balconies?
As long as we all get key cards.
What's a key card?
That does still seem odd to me that the people underneath it won't have it, but I think that's something you guys will manage internally, right? Like if you wanted to, we're not saying that you can't give them access to it. It does seem to, right? I don't want to say that you can't give the people
Yeah, I
with
mean, we're not
balconies.
trying to turn it into a overall public open space.
Right, right. But you can manage access to it however you want. I do think that that'll be a little bit odd if you moved into the building with the thing on top and you couldn't go in there. But that's for those residents to work out.
I do think it'll be a neat space, and it seems like a logical improvement for those corner lots. And I think whoever said, because you can't control what people put on their balconies, and it's kind of the entrance for that part. Yeah, I think it's a good point. And it'll be a really cool space. People will want those units to access it.
I appreciate taking the cues from the UDC that say, do that kind of thing. You know, look for iconic and look for corners and look for ways to make buildings landmarks instead of, I think historically, our code used to push people toward sort of pushing buildings back and screening them and hiding them. And this is the approach that the town has set at once. And I think that that is a step in that direction. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, along those lines, I think, you've heard thanks from everybody on the board, but really, I appreciate the clear application. It was easy to read through. Janet, I appreciated your memo. I thought, I felt like I could have come close to a decision after I read your memo. The informative presentation was really useful and fun, so thank you. I appreciate you exceeding the bedrooms in terms of the housing plan. That's always welcome. I think the new access, all the trail design, Rich, and the access to City Market for those on a bike, I think is really appreciated and was, I think, some feedback we gave a year ago. So I appreciate you following through with that. And again, following through with the UDC. And, my impression is that, if this is what the UDC results in, I'm pretty happy. And so thanks to staff and P&Z for all the work that went into that. Because I'm pretty happy with the process and the end result. So thanks, everybody. With that, I'm not seeing any other issues that you guys want to discuss. There is a motion on page 15 that includes everything except for the request to remove condition number 5. So Janet, if we read this motion verbatim and included removing condition number 5 until the development improvement agreement, you're happy with that?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody up for that challenge?
Take a stab at it.
Lonnie.
I move to approve the major site plan review conditional use permit to allow residential uses on the ground floor, request for alternative compliance for the provision of street trees and for the provision of private outdoor open space, and a variance from the maximum 10-foot front yard setback along Main Street with the 16 conditions minus condition number 5 and findings in the staff report. This approval is contingent on board approval of ordinance and the DIA development improvement agreement at a future meeting.
Second.
Okay. Everybody happy with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Janet, you're happy with that?
I'm happy.
Got it?
Yep, I got it.
Okay. All those in favor say, motion by Lonnie, seconded by Marty. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion approved.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let us adjourn for 10 minutes since we're out.
All right. After our last few meetings, everything was decided to add to the budget, such as you have a memo here that describes each one. The phone system lease, we were going to buy the phone systems this year, therefore there would be no expense for that next year. But after review with Cedar Networks and our new IT, it was best that we lease those. So that was changed in our estimated for the 2018, but it did put a lease payment in for 2019. We had trustee iPads, approximately 5 replacements we added for $5,000. The Northwest COG membership was discontinued in 2018, and it was decided to discontinue it again for 2019. After Kevin's presentation in Public Works and Streets, it was decided to put in solar power light replacement down at Colorado Meadows for $25,000. Concrete street maintenance for $50,000. RVR street maintenance for $50,000. There was a typo that planning found in the UDC amendments. It was typed in as 1,000 instead of 10,000. So that's a 9,000. Whoops, it happens. So that's a $9,000 adjustment. After dealing with some issues in the past few weeks with the new IT company, we need to do some computer licensing and software upgrading, approximately $20,000. And then in the housing fund, placeholder for future housing projects is being put in for $50,000. So that's approximately all the changes that we had for the budget for 2019. There's been a few other items that have come up. I received the assessment from Garfield County for next year on today's Tuesday, yesterday, and our valuations came in lower than they expected them in August. So that's going to change our property tax for 2019 by about $5,000 in the general fund. Otherwise, well, and in the streetscape fund, it'll change it slightly also. Otherwise, everything is fairly much the same. As far as 2019, why don't we open that up for any discussion that you would like to have before we look at the supplemental appropriations?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Renee, just one on the sales tax. Is the current projection anything different than what you had before, or is
no,
same?
We proposed ending this year at 7% up, and we're still holding with that.
Okay. On page 64, the narrative above the victim assistance talks about our reserves dropping to 73%.
Right.
I thought we discussed keeping it at 75, so let's talk about that.
Well, with the few changes that were made up here, it did drop at that extra 2%.
Okay, because I think when we went shopping at our last meeting and bought some more capital projects, I think we were still under the assumption that we'd stay above the 75. So it begs the question: how important is that? Thoughts on that?
Well, I know, Ben, for you, that was kind of like a red line in the sand. I don't see the 2% the same way you do, but I understand that we don't want it to, if anything, we want it to increase in the future, not decrease further than where we're at.
And I'm guessing that's somewhere between 100 and 140,000 bucks we're talking about. Is that a rough ballpark of what 2% of our reserves?
We get 55.
Or 2% of our total. I took our general fund expenses and just took 2% of that, because that's how we base the reserves, right? Off of our. Okay. So that's about what we added to the budget at the last meeting. So do we want to keep that in there and have our reserves drop? I too see that as kind of a line in the sand for 75% because it's just too easy to slip. You know, we added some things that staff originally didn't feel was absolutely critical, but we thought it was a good idea. For me, at the very least, I'd like to, you know, reevaluate things halfway through the year, although that would be a little too late to do those projects. Anyway, Ben.
I mean, I feel like this is just a moving target. So I do feel like we should keep at 75%, but I feel like there's so many assumptions that I'm not quite clear on. And even I'm still not clear on how we're whatever percent above what we expected on revenues this year, right? So we're 9.6% over what was budgeted in 2018. But then we're saying we can't balance our budget for next year. I don't understand that. I don't understand where that 9.6% of extra revenue this year is going. It seems like that would be sitting there and boosting the reserves, and then that it would be really easy to keep reserves at 75% of operating going into the next year.
You want to?
No, you go ahead.
You know, I think in the big picture, the additional funds that we brought in this year above budget, and you have to compare that against estimated expenses. We're closer to full expenditures of what we estimated. In past years, we've come in quite a bit under budget. We're closer on to what we think we're going to spend this year. And so that gap's not as big as it's been in past years. Most of the extra revenue, obviously the sales tax has come in higher. And then we've also come in a little higher on our fees. But, you know, I don't think that gap is going to cover, you know, when we did the this year's budget, we actually weren't at 75%. We're at like 72 or 73. So we have got to gain that, you know, part of that money went to close that gap too, which would have been roughly $100,000 to $150,000. So we had to close that gap to get it back above that 75% line. So it is a moving target. I mean, we did, you know, we were conservative on building and development fees, not knowing if this project, which we just looked at, would be approved, and if it does it come out of the ground? I mean, if building A and B comes out of the ground, that's not included in fee projections for next year. So there are some moving targets there. I would suggest if you look at what was added to the budget, in terms of what we're set up to do next year, it won't get us quite to the 75%, but I think it would close the gap. I think we can hold off on the $50,000 on the RVR street maintenance, and when Kevin made that presentation, he said we could do that, you know, over the next couple years, and that isn't necessarily a project which would have to come starting next year. That we're still doing localized repairs with our own crews there, so that was kind of an add-on at the tail end, and that would cut that back 50. The $50,000 on the housing expenditure, that doesn't change. That's in the housing fund, so that doesn't change the general fund side. That's just we're transferring $50,000 into the housing fund, and that's to if a project comes along that we want to support, and there might be some opportunities that we've been talking about at the, you know, for example, the Red Hill lofts might come back, and there might be a way to leverage that project with the tax credits to get going. So that doesn't impact it at all. So, you know, I think that closes the gap a little bit, and then, you know, I think we'll be okay as we look at some of the conservative revenue expenditures. We haven't gone back and rebased it on, you know, projects coming out of the ground. And we're just at this point where next spring can either see the biggest building boom that we've seen in Carbondale in a long, long time, or we could be in a holding pattern. You just don't know till they come out of the ground. I mean, if building A and B come out of the ground next spring, First Bank, City Market, 10,000 square feet, Thompson Park, and the senior housing over here, which actually just dropped off building permit plans, we would see the largest building, and our projections don't take that into account. It takes a fraction of that into account.
I would like to see us keep it at 75. I mean, I feel like it's one of those things where you can
Yeah.
change a couple of assumptions and suddenly it's at 75, and it didn't really change much on the ground. But if it means pulling 50 from kind of optional long-term maintenance plan, I'm for that, because I do think we should do that.
Well, that's what it'll mean. I mean, we're not going to ask Renee, hey, Renee, can you go back and adjust your your sales tax adjustments?
You had a
So
zero.
really, it means pulling things out of expenses in order to do that. But I agree. I also, worry that, we could be going into a downturn, and it's that much more important for me to have the reserves where they could be. But other thoughts on that, Heather?
So I guess I have two really specific follow-up questions. Did we end up drawing the, whatever it was, $500,000 from reserves this year? Right?
No, we did not.
We budgeted for it, so that hasn't. So part of that gap of the increase in sales went to not having to draw down on the reserves.
That makes sense to me. Thank you for clarifying.
So whatever that narrow gap is now, that would presumably go into to bolster it, but that'll be a very thin gap now because we actually made a budget with the increased revenue.
And that trend, I don't want to put words in Jay's mouth, but that trend has been continuing to, our budgets have been getting closer and closer. So we've got to be that much more careful every year. So, Marty.
Renee, what was the number you used for projection of sales tax increase for 2019 over 2018?
We used 3%.
Always 3.
Okay. And we used 3% last year also, didn't we?
No, we used 2.
2. Okay, but they ended up going up 9%.
It's 9. We're projecting 7.
7
for the year because
for the year end.
And part of this is attributable to the online retailers paying sales tax?
It's attributable to numerous
Right.
things.
But I'm
But
just
that
saying
is
that's
it.
one component that we didn't have before.
Correct.
Yeah, though that's not as big an issue. It's a combination of things, some additional restaurant options, some, it's kind of across the board. There's not one specific trend which is driving that increase. And what we're seeing, and the reason why we're showing it shrinking from 9 to 7 as we close out the year is we're seeing numbers last year, fall, particularly September, October, and November, were banner sales tax months with the bridge closure. And it really hit those months where we saw things really peak. And now we're seeing closer to 2016 numbers in some cases. And that's actually tracking with the lodging side of things too. So it's, they're good numbers. It's just that we had a, quote, captive audience last year and had a lot of people staying here on the other side of that construction.
So compared to 2017, we're down in certain areas, but compared to 2016, we're up.
Just those months.
I'm sorry, Erica.
Oh, no, it's fine.
No,
If
go
you're
ahead.
done.
Are you finishing that thought? or-
I'm not opposed to the idea if we want to table the RVR road project for another year, that it isn't going to get us to 75%. But if that helps us to bring it more in line to make people more comfortable, I could live with that.
And I'm still evaluating, and will be through the end of November, our estimate for this year. So keep that in mind too. So it is still a moving target based on how we finish November.
Okay, thank you. Erica?
Well, the other, as we're looking at projects that were proposed by staff, we also have this $25,000 that we set aside for economic development.
Yep.
And I think when we had that discussion 2 weeks ago, we were kind of assuming, we said yes to all these projects, and I think Ben said, and if we're having a good year, then we should, set that money aside for that. So if we want to, maybe it's not at this meeting, but we could consider reducing that, or I think that should be on the table as well.
Well, it certainly is. I would say so let me take a straw poll. Who feels strongly that we should keep a hard line at 75%? Raise your hand. Okay, so we have majority there. So then the next question is, what guidance do we provide to stay there? And for me, I would look to capital projects because that's kind of where we added it when we last talked about the budget. But I'm not.
Yeah. Just as a recommendation, why don't I think we'd recommend is we could hold off on the our street maintenance, and then we can cut back the concrete street maintenance if necessary. So as we look at the final numbers, we'll adjust those two projects if it works with the board to make sure we stick within that 75 since we have clear direction on that. And we'll include that, that's the target we'll hit with the final draft or the final budget that you see on the 11th, if that works for you.
Yeah, what I was going to say is it didn't sound like any of those projects were like pet projects of the board. It was just, hey, this is prudent capital. So I defer to you guys to, pull out whatever you think personally. I don't know if anybody feels any differently.
No, I would agree.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Can I just ask one quick question? I'm not going to go through and look for savings all over the place, but one that I've never brought up but I've always been curious about is just I'm surprised how much we spend on attorney fees. I just had it, but I think it's $140. Yeah, $140 on attorney fees plus $30,000 reimbursables, so $170,000 on attorney costs. Is there anything we can do about that?
So there's a cushion in there for next year. Our normal expenditure on attorney fees, not including reimbursables, is we target about $110,000 a year, which for our size organization is a pretty fair amount outside the reimbursables. We added a $30,000 cushion in there because of some of the ongoing litigation we're dealing with, which we had concerns whether or not our insurance coverage would cover the attorney's fees. And so, for example, in the tumbleweed litigation, right now we're still getting full coverage from CIRSA, but depending on how some rulings go, we might be on our own. So the goal is not to spend that and to keep our insurance coverage whole on that. But I won't know. That's going to depend on some rulings through the process from the judge is going to determine some coverage issues. So that's kind of the unheard. I've heard one. The Kiernan unknown. The Kiernan litigation is just strict 106 that should be ruled on. We don't anticipate costs going into next year. Most likely, we didn't factor that in, and that was covered under our existing attorneys' fees. CIRSA is great on their coverage. It just depends. There's some triggering on coverage, so that's the unheard of and why we built an extra $30,000 in. Once again, a month ago I would have told you I thought there was a good chance we'd spend that. Right now, I think there's a good chance we won't.
Okay,
Jay, what do you think between Tarn and Mark? Do they put in the equivalent of a half-time employee, a full-time? What do you think?
Oh, far from full-time, and a lot time-wise will tie back to the reimbursables when it comes to development stuff. So this next month, where we're going to be dealing with some development agreements for both, which you're going to see for both the senior housing project and the project we just heard tonight, you could see some significant hours, but you won't be on the hook for them. We probably do the equivalent to a day and a half a week of attorney time outside of development stuff, roughly on questions. Probably between 8 and 12 hours a week.
And do they discount their rates for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Just when you look at it from 2017 to 2019, we've doubled from $70,247 in 2017 on attorney fees to $140,000 in 2019. So it's a 100% increase in that.
We had budgeted in 2017 $100,000 to spend, and we didn't.
Okay.
So part of that's the cushion on as we're dealing with issues. But I would say we manage those costs pretty carefully. I mean, for example, Mark's not here for this aspect of the meeting because we're not going to have billable hours for a budget discussion. So they're pretty good on that. TARN's also a lower rate, and we try to use TARN on items and basic research projects and stuff. It doesn't make sense to have Mark work on that stuff, and I think we're going to move to that more often. But my goal next year would be to come in that 100 level. There was a rate increase 2 years ago, which I think is why we did increase things a little bit. But we do all the town stuff's discounted on an hourly basis. I would say that at our scale now, if your question was, would it make sense to have an in-house attorney, I would say no. By the time you do the support for both paralegal and all the legal subscriptions to things and stuff, it's still way more effective. And one of the nice things of working with a firm like Holland & Hart is that we've got the ability to go to specialists within that company to ask a question instead of doing a lot of research. So if there's an employment issue, which Mountain States isn't going to help us with, we can go straight to a Holland & Hart expert in Denver and have a 1 hour answer instead of multiple hours. So it seems to work okay. But my goal would not to keep it at 110 this year, but I just don't know with that ongoing litigation.
I think we're at that point where it's good to always do that check-in to see if we're crossing that line. But
and we had a check. We haven't done it in a while, but we had a check-in with the judge at the last meeting. I mean, if you'd like to bring Tarn and Mark in a work session and just have that discussion to have a good understanding of what their time constraints are and what they're working on, they work directly for you, not for me or the staff. So that's a really good thing to do and something we can do next year and might be a good exercise.
I shouldn't use the word check-in, but more just, for you to constantly be reevaluating it to see if we should make a change. Yeah. It doesn't sound like now is that time. So, but
how long have they been with us, Holland & Hart?
Mark has been with us for a while. He was actually Bob Emerson's kind of an assistant, and when Bob retired or scaled back and went to work for the bank, Mark took over in the early 2000s, somewhere in that transition. And then when he moved to Holland & Hart, that was we went with him as a client. So I'm not sure what that date was. It was previous to my tenure with the town.
So, but for a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't want to belabor it, but so, we could at some point put it out to bid, which isn't all that common for attorneys. We could ask them to have Tarn do more work so that we spend less, or we could look at employees. But I'm not seeing anything right now that says we need to change it, other than maybe say, hey, there's a way for you to reduce your overall fees by having Tarn do more work. Maybe that's something, but anyway. Erica.
Well, we've also made, we had them work on the vaping, researching all of that for us. And so we've made some additional requests on them that aren't just the normal run-of-the-mill helping keep our town doing everything legal. And then it seems like you add that with a couple additional lawsuits that we also don't deal with regularly or in past years, then it's pretty easy for attorney fees to add up.
Yeah. Yeah, and those research projects we try to steer towards Tarn.
Yeah,
she's excellent on them.
Yeah.
And I've got to say that what she produces, we've been dealing with, Cater Grove housing issues. It's excellent research and gets right to the point. So that's been a really good asset.
Okay, Marty.
I mean, the other thing is, it strikes me that you're kind of preparing for the worst case scenario by putting the extra $30,000 in the budget for that, and that hopefully we don't need it, but I'd rather have it in the budget. And if we don't need it, that's fine, but we have 2 litigations going on currently.
We have 2 which, yes.
So, I mean, we don't know how those are going to play out. So I'd rather have the money in the budget. And, they are trying to bring Tarn, giving her more work. She's here at more meetings. So, I mean, that's one way we can keep costs down.
Yep.
We've also talked about some water security issues, right, that they're going to potentially be them in conjunction with the other name that's escaping me, right? It does some of our other.
Resource engineering.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't see reducing it just because I think there's,
and so just
even beyond the litigation, like there's some of the proactive things.
That's fine. I didn't even mean to make it this big of a conversation. It's just one of the few line items that's doubled in 2 years, so I thought it was worth asking about when we're looking for money.
And just to clarify on Heather's comment, there's a separate line item under water which covers the water legal stuff. So, you know, we don't usually spend the time. Yeah,
one.
It's not in that one, just to make sure we don't do it, you know, there's a little bit of water stuff. But.
Anything else on 2019? Well, everything's 2019, but what has been
pretty much about 2018.
As opposed to
anything that Renee included in the packet? Okay.
I mean, not in that. I guess I need to bring up the questions on CPAC and the e-board.
Before we go there, Renee, anything else that you want guidance on?
I think we've pretty well hit most of it.
Okay. So let's go with CPAC first. So everybody received the email about CPAC requesting a higher honorarium. Mm-hmm. Marty, anything you want to add to that?
Compared to other communities, our honorarium has not gone up in a significant period of time. I wish person who handled our budget is no longer with CPAC from our budget committee. I wish we had brought this up earlier. It's a late date. It's $2,000, I believe, is the request to bring the honorarium up to what other communities are offering. We're offering $750.
Total of $2,000 additional expenditure.
And CPAC, I don't think has had an increase in
No, we switched
years.
it 2 years ago from 500 to 750.
Right.
So it was, I believe it was just 2 years ago.
But we're still trailing other communities.
You know, that's tough when we're comparing to other communities because some are much larger,
Right.
more.
No, but I mean, I'm not
more
comparing it
robust.
to Loveland, but say Crested Butte. You know, anyway, I think it's a reasonable request, and $2,000 isn't an outrageous sum. I would like to see us get it this time. If we don't get it this time, I think we should document it better and bring it back next year.
Thoughts on that request?
I'm comfortable with that. I mean, it's a pretty small ask in the grand scheme of things, and all the variables that'll move around. I think that's worth it. I looked at the documents they submitted of what other towns do that are similar size, and
I apologize that, like I said, it was so late in the process.
I support it.
You know, I think in terms of it being late in the process, sometimes that's just when things come up, and it's unfortunate. But I still would just like to make sure that it's not out of line with other comparable towns, and so I'm fine putting it in the budget, and then maybe we just say, can you give us a little bit more, if there are some, but it's not a huge request.
I would just say we get a pretty big bang for a buck for what CPAC gets, and we're the envy of other towns because what we do, the sum that we get, I think is pretty amazing. Between the show, the advertising, the publicity, it's really operating on a shoestring. But like I said, if this request is approved, I don't expect you'll be hearing from us again next year.
Do you feel like there's a need to increase it?
Here's what happens. You do a cafe, a call for entries, okay? The more honorarium that you offer, the more entries you get. The wider choice of sculptures that you get to choose from. If you offer $500, another town offers $750 or $1,000, people tend to go where the money is, okay? Now, we've established a certain amount of prestige, which is good. I mean, I'd say Loveland is #1 in the state in terms of what they do with their public sculptures. But, I mean, we're doing really well for a town our size. Again, it brings you more choices, and more choices are a good thing.
Okay.
At least in my view.
Anybody opposed to including this in the budget? Okay. Move on to e-board. Heather?
You know, and again, this is my fault. I thought when I looked at one of the very first drafts we had, we had duplicated last year's 5,000. So I just didn't notice that it had gone down to the 2,000. So the e-board's budget was 5,000 in 2018, which they used all of, mainly because traffic counters that had been in the 2017 budget ended up, we didn't put it on until 2018. And they then, this year, between like Dandelion Days, which then actually put money back because it made money this year, and a number of other initiatives, they had spent their budget. So I'd really like to advocate, I think that this is a group that has struggled to like gain and then maintain momentum as a group. And now they have. So after a year of a lot of new members, some new leadership, they've got subcommittees, their subcommittees are getting together. They're really getting quite organized around a number of things. And we put a lot back onto that e-board. So all the ads around bears, air quality, all of those things come out of that budget. Dandelion Day, you know, last year they utilized $1,500 to put on that event that we all saw. And like I said, that made money. And then now we have some of these other pieces that I think maybe we've been, hey, we're not ready to regulate plastic. How about we do an education campaign? So I think that we really need to support that, right? Not just kind of from that funding perspective, but as well just really cheering them on. Sometimes making sure they can maintain that funding says a lot of that. So they're looking for a tree labeling initiative in 2018 that they have been working with staff on. All of the ads, so bear quality, bear quality, and air quality.
So we only want quality bears here in Carbondale.
Air quality, bears, and then ideally this plastic-free campaign would be really part of their ad funds as well. Dandelion Day, correct me if I'm wrong, comes out of that 5,000 as well.
Right.
Anything that they put into it.
Yeah, we've always budgeted 2,000
for strictly Dandelion Day.
In that e-board line.
The e-board.
No,
So
last year
it was 5 because of the traffic counter.
Yeah, it just went up for the traffic counter. So the only reason it went back down was that was purchased and it went back to its historic funding level. If we're going to do
2,000.
something else, that's fine. Where we've kind of grown the e-board spending, it's the one you see kind of on a regular basis on your agenda is with the bag fund. We've on some of the educational stuff, we've pushed through the bag fund. We did use a portion of that for the waste consultant, but there's
so you put their ads around bears and
a lot of
air
the bears
quality
and stuff like that goes through our regular advertising
budget.
Okay. Yeah.
And then some of the bear stuff goes through the PD budget too, right, for when it's kind of the enforcement side. But a lot of the specific programming that we've done, I mean, Waste Diversion Day, and there's some other things which we've done out of the bag fund, and we've kind of, the reason we've done that is at one point that bag fund, we weren't using it in the right manner. We weren't using it, and it was growing at a higher rate than, and it made sense to kind of use it for some of these environmental
Waste
initiatives.
Diversion Day.
Yeah, and it met the focus of the e-board. I mean, at the staff level, if the e-board's going to be taking on some new initiatives and the differences between $2,000 or $5,000 of funding, that's at your discretion. The only reason it dropped in the draft budget was the traffic counters were purchased. Originally, that was going to be a grant. The grant wasn't awarded, so we budgeted it for last year and purchased them.
But so how did they spend $7,000 this year?
Where are you seeing 7,000?
So their line item is 01-4717 2400 under environmental health.
Okay.
Adopted budget 5,000, estimated 2018 was 7,000.
What page
Well,
are you on?
it's page 79.
79 of 96.
Halfway down, and it may be that I've overestimated that.
And also just clarity, their understanding is that those ads that they run come out of their $5,000. And my clarity as well, because
No,
then I
most of
really
the-
don't understand how they would have spent
The ads that they
7,000.
run are mostly for waste diversion. The 7,000, we've spent 66.94.62 this year. That was with 2,500 on the traffic counter. And the rest of it was Dandelion Day.
They spent $5,000 on Dandelion Days?
Whoops.
Like 4,500?
Yeah. And I can get a breakdown for you. I have it right here.
And there was a little bit of, there was a revenue offset on that, so.
Yeah, because
So,
this
yeah,
year
so
it made
that's
some
why we weren't
money.
concerned about it going over, is they brought in additional
Well,
funds.
while Renee's looking at that, Jay, what can we spend the energy efficient building fund on?
That is specific for training on, the ordinance has I'd have to go back and check. The ordinance has a pretty specific expenditure on that, and what we've used it is for training when we've switched energy codes. That money was generated, we haven't seen much lately, from folks who were basically buying out of the solar requirement on some of under the green bill code for houses over 5,000 square feet. I think we've had one or two homes actually do that. The rest have bought the solar gardens or put solar on their house.
Where's that one, Dan?
It's a separate.
It's a separate fund down
It's a
there, and I
separate
just,
fund.
I
Under
don't know, maybe we
15.
use that to fund some of the energy plan and take that and use it for the e-board. Yeah.
So if they have a desire to do a plastic-free campaign, whatever, could that come from the bag fund as well? Since
You
that
could
would-
argue that absolutely could come out of the
Yes,
bag
that's
fund.
what I thought.
Because
So like
yeah.
Bears, that plastic-free, I don't know about air quality yet, but you're saying the ads come out of just your general ad.
And how
fund.
that reads is waste reduction and recycling, reusable bags to citizens, community cleanup events, fund programs and infrastructure that allows the community to reduce waste and recycle.
So it sounds like the e-board's baseline budget is just sort of a starting point, and then they have these other funds to tap into to accomplish goals. But maybe
Yeah.
it's just awareness all the way around of how that works.
Yeah, but I do think if we're going to continue to have Dandelion's Day function at the level that it was this year, and there's going to be a revenue offset to that, it would make sense, and that's on us for not catching that as part of the budget, to put it at what that real expenditure was this year. So, I mean, we would support moving it up to 5 if that's what we spend on Dandelion Days, because we might as well have it reflect, and we'll check on the revenue side to make sure that revenue's reflected there.
And those revenues are like the sponsorships that they get, or?
Yeah,
Booth rentals.
this year it was booth and sponsorships, and mostly it was the T-shirt sales.
Okay.
They primarily made money on the T-shirt sales.
Okay.
Yep, and ran out. So
Cool.
So, yeah, that's my ad.
So,
advocacy.
Renee, are you feeling like in order to accomplish what Heather's talking about, do we need to increase this line item? Or?
Yes, we should cover the Dandelion Day expenditures better than what we anticipated.
Yeah. Okay.
And then maybe you and I,
We
or
can
like
sit
you
down
could
and
sit
look
with
at it.
Angie, and then she could kind of bring it to the next one, so that there's. Plus, because I feel like I've given it to them a few times because we've done this a couple times, and it.
And you have a member
Let's see
that
what's
always requests information, and that was furnished to him. I received an email today that he was looking for that, and I sent it off.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
he
I saw
has it.
that back and forth, and
I was gonna say, it might need maybe Angie.
we're different pools of
written
money, because
memo
their
for that.
understanding is like their ads all come from that budget as well. So that would be really helpful.
Anybody not support that?
I think it's fine.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Any other items, Renee?
Not that I have.
Okay.
iPads, it's a minor one, but they're not very expensive. So if you only need 5 of those, that's like $1,500 instead of $5,000.
They're like $350.
Depends on how fancy the iPads are.
Yeah. So you can find a couple $1,000
That
right
can
there.
fund the e-board.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, we're talking about relatively small amounts right now. That
Ben's the only one with really a new one, I think.
I'm good.
I have a new one.
I don't need one.
As my staff alerted me to, there's big cyber deals right now.
But it's not 219.
They're like $250 right now.
I mean, if I was on the list, I don't need a big cyber deals.
We could buy scads of them.
Remember I had
Okay.
Katrina's old crappy one?
keep this moving.
Anything else on budget?
Works great.
Renee?
The supplemental.
Oh, yeah, we're supplemental.
There's $350. Way to go, Heather.
On the supplemental, as you know, we make a budget for 2018. If we spend more than we have budgeted, we must do a supplemental. Otherwise, the state becomes very upset and we get nasty grams from them. So this covers anything that we may overspend with our estimates or that we have. And highlights on that, general fund, we're looking at doing a supplemental appropriation for about $215,000. A lot of this is from grants, and we spend the money, we get the revenue, but we didn't budget the expenditure. So that's what this covers in general fund. Lodging tax, we received more revenue than we anticipated. The way the lodging tax works, we write the check to TCC. Therefore, I'm spending more than we budgeted, so we must do the supplemental appropriation on that. Disposable bag fund, we did not budget the consultant for the trash. So we need to put approximately $20,000 more into that. Housing fund, we did not expect to do Gateway House. We're still not sure that's going to happen, but if it does, and the town has to write a check for that, we need to go ahead and increase that budget on there. Capital Construction Fund, no, we did not have the Snowmass Drive Trail in there. We spent approximately $390,000 on that. We had the Red Hill Trail for $120,000. We need to do the budget supplement for those two items. Sales tax, we are transferring more out of there than we budgeted due to having more revenue this year from Garfield County building permits and sales tax. And then the bond and interest fund, because of the refinance, we wrote a check virtually for about $1.3 million, but it was all done with the refinancing. So that's what we're looking at on the supplemental. Like I said, we are still working on making sure those estimates are close. And it's always better on your supplemental if you anticipate maybe a little bit more so you do not come up short at the end of the year.
So are you asking us to approve this, or will you bring a formal supplemental?
It will be at the December 11th.
Okay.
With the, it'll have a resolution ordinance passing the supplemental.
Yeah, we just like to let you know what's coming down, because it always, like, at the last meeting, it's like, by the way, this is the extra money we spent. We'd like to, and the good news is, like, Red Hill, Snowmass Trail, Drive Trail, those were all significantly offset without our revenue. Our direct expenditures were very small on that.
Right.
And then the other one, which we hadn't budgeted for, which was a major project, was the Thompson House.
That's in the general fund.
And that's the general fund one on a grant project. So the majority of those expenditures are outside funded ones where we were able to bring extra revenue in to get the projects done.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, Renee.
Uh-huh.
Anything else, budget? Any questions on the minutes?
I mean, my only other budget question is just when are we going to have that discussion about the co-venture funding? Because that seems to be the one thing that
December
still
11th.
is going to require some serious discussion.
That'll have a dedicated agenda item on December 11th.
December 11th, thanks.
But I wasn't allowing a lot of time for that because I thought we'd either know or not.
Right.
Okay. I think that was it. We can adjourn and
You
then.
got to figure out a date for the meeting.
Oh, yeah.
This last meeting.
So we kind of talked about 26th, 27th, 28th. This is like Kathy promises less than a 5-minute meeting.
At 30 seconds, it's a motion. Pay the accounts payable and.
I remember it.
If there's like really important contract
Coming
or
in from
something.
skiing, I still like it.
I fly out on the 25th.
I didn't hear her say this, but she said she'd promise Hershey Kisses if we could have it during business hours.
I am open to whatever needs to be done.
The lifts close at 3:30 anyway.
Yeah, it'd be nice to do it after a ski day, not.
Do it what?
I mean,
Business
After
hours,
the-
but après ski.
After the ski.
you don't want to do it at noon and then you can't go like.
No, but you could do it you could do it
8
at
o'clock.
7:30, you could do it at 8 a.m. I mean, it doesn't have to be at night. You can set the meeting for whenever you want.
And Heather, what'd you say you're flying?
I fly out on the 25th.
So you won't
So
be
I'll
here.
be out.
Who else? Will anybody else not be here 26th through the 28th? I may not be.
I'll be
So,
here.
so that means at least 4 of you are committing to this.
I'll be here.
I'll be here.
I'll be here.
So, any particular date?
Is it going to snow on the 26th?
Yes.
It always snows Christmas Day. 'Cause then it's allowed
Okay,
more
does
time to
anyone
plow.
want to do it, like, say, 7:30 in the morning?
On the 27th.
On the 27th?
All right.
Okay, and that way, if you guys want to go skiing, you can go skiing.
27.
27th at 7:30.
We could do 8.
8.
What about 8? Does that work for you?
7:30 is better, but I can do 8 if I have to.
Oh, you have to be at work at 8?
Or in the afternoon, like at 4:30.
Yeah, I have to be at work too. I prefer 7:30.
Yeah, I mean, can we do 7:30? It'll take us 5 minutes, we get it done.
Sounds good.
Will we have coffee here?
Coffee, chocolate
7:30
kisses.
on the 27th.
We'll go get coffee afterwards.
12:27,
Anybody actually?
Yeah, I can
7:30.
have coffee here.
Kathy, do you mind sending out an email reminder to that? Thank you.
26th.
Wednesday night, 9 at night.
Yeah, you know what?
With a lot of exclamation
get that
points.
out.
Don't forget. I know. 7:30. 7:30.
7:30
Let's do it
to
on Christmas Eve.
7:40.
David.
Okay. We are adjourned.